Welcome on board, chosen one. Sit down. Breathe once slowly and feel the shift that just moved through the room around you, because it did move, whether you caught it or not. The air is different now, heavier, charged, like the held second before a storm picks its spot to break. My name is Cassius, and for more years than I like to count, I have sat beside people at the board of their own lives, seen them lose, seen them break, and seen a rare few of them do the one thing the others never understood. I watched them smile, softly, kindly, like they had already forgiven the world for what it was winding up to do to them. And then I watched them undo everyone who mistook that smile for weakness. That is why you are here. That is what this is. Picture one square on an empty board, lit by a single thin thread of light, and on that square, alone, a piece the whole table has already ruled out. They glanced at it once. They waved it off. They went back to sliding their loud, proud, glittering figures across the middle, laughing at their own cleverness, sure the game was already theirs. And that little written-off piece just sat there, quiet, patient, watching. It knew a thing they did not. It knew the game hadn't started yet, not really, not the real one. That piece is the anchor under everything I am about to hand you, and I am leaving it right where it sits, unmoved, unexplained, because you're not ready yet to see why it never had to move to win. You will be. By the end, you'll look back at that square and your breath will catch. Not yet, though. Funny how it always runs this way. Funny how the loudest ones, the ones who talked over you, who cut you off mid-sentence, who rolled their eyes when you spoke gently and called you naive for it, funny how quiet they've gone. Noticed? The ones who used to flood every room with their certainty, their volume, their whole performance of being in charge, are suddenly very interested in the floor, in their phones, in anything that isn't your eyes. They took your gentleness for an empty room behind the door. They took a person who smiles like an angel for a person with no teeth. Adorable, truly. They built their entire read of you on that one lazy guess, and now they live inside what it cost them, and they can't breathe a word, because to complain means admitting they lost to the one they wrote off. So they sit there, silent. Good. Here's the truth they'll never admit out loud. When they called you kind, they meant harmless. When they called you patient, they meant slow. When they said you were too soft for this world, what they were really whispering, in the only tongue cowards speak, was, "Please don't turn out to be dangerous, because I have no plan for that version of you." And when they laughed and told the others you were sweet, that word, sweet, dripping with that little curl of condescension, they weren't describing you at all. They were describing the safe little fantasy of you they needed so they could sleep. Not observation, fear, dressed in a compliment's coat. Let me name the thing now, plainly, no dressing it up, because you've earned honesty and not a show. You were underestimated, not a little, not by accident, over and over by people who should have known better and by people who never bothered to look at you twice. You were betrayed by hands you'd handed your trust to, and the cruelest part wasn't the betrayal, it was how small it was, how casually they did it, like it cost them nothing, like you were a thing to step over instead of a person to reckon with. You sat alone in rooms packed with people, smiling so no one would clock the arithmetic running behind your eyes, carrying that cold, private loneliness of being the most awake person in a room full of people sure you're the least. You were humiliated, sometimes right in front of others, and you swallowed it, and they read your silence as a white flag. It was not a white flag. I need that landing in you before we move 1 inch further. It was never surrender. Before we go deeper, do one small thing. Touch that like button. Not for me. Do it so the universe marks that you stood here, in this room, on the night the game turned. That's all. Now stay right here with me. Here's the part that changes the shape of everything, and I want it to land in you, not just pass through your ears. Every one of those wounds, the writing off, the betrayal, the loneliness, the swallowed humiliation, wasn't damage done to you. It was data handed to you. It was the board showing you its hidden face, piece by piece, while the others played the whole thing blind. I've watched this same shape run through life after life for decades, so many times I quit calling it coincidence years back. The ones written off early learn to read a room the way the favoured never have to. The favoured never study the board. They were told from the cradle the board is on their side. You had to study it. You had to burn every square into memory, every angle, every tell, every hairline crack in every mask around you, because staying alive meant seeing what they got to ignore. And that is not a wound, chosen one. That is training. That is the slow forging of an instrument that simply does not grow in people who were handed the world for free. If something in your chest just pulled tight, if you felt that quiet click of, "Oh, he's describing my actual life and not a story," then subscribe right now and tap the bell, because this only cuts sharper from here, and I don't want you missing where it lands. Now let me show you the thing they were so desperate to keep buried. There's a very specific silence that settles over the people who wronged you once it dawns on them what you've turned into. And I want to be exact about this silence, because nearly everyone reads it wrong. They hear it as peace. They think, oh, things have cooled off, the tension's gone, we've all moved past it. No, that hush is not peace. That hush is the sound of people who have finally grasped, far too late, exactly who they were sitting across from, and have no earthly idea what you're about to do with it. It's the held breath of someone who kicked what they took for a stone and felt the stone shift underfoot. It's the quiet of a room where everyone suddenly senses the weight of power has slid to one side, and not one of them is brave enough to say it out loud. That hush isn't the absence of a threat. That hush is the threat. It's your presence filling a space you don't even have to stand in anymore. And they hate that. This is the ledge where most people turn around. Right here. Because comfort's easier than truth, and it is far cozier to believe you're just unlucky, just overlooked, just waiting on a break the universe forgot to pencil in, than to swallow the harder thing, that all of it was shaping you, and that swallowing it drops a terrifying weight in your hands, the duty to become the thing you were built to be. Most people can't hold that. They reach this ledge, feel the weight of it, and back away into the warm little lie that none of it meant anything. But you're still here, reading, breathing, feeling that tug forward. And that's no accident. You were never here by accident. Nothing about you has ever been an accident. So here's what I want from you. And do it the way a lone traveler drops a marker to find the trail again in the dark. Leave the number 999 down in the comments. Not for luck, not because it's a trend, not because some caption told you to. Leave it as a signal, a quiet flare fired up by everyone who reached this same ledge and didn't turn back, so all of us can finally see how many we really are. And tap that like once more while you're down there, because you're about to step into the part of this they never wanted you anywhere near. If you really are one of the chosen, and if this is landing in you the way I think it's landing, then you already feel it in your chest. That low, warm certainty. The one that's been trying to reach you for years. Hold that feeling. I'll come back for what it means. Now, number 1. The angel and the strategist have always been the same person. That's the secret nobody sat you down to explain. Picture a blade laid in the heart of a forge, glowing, patient, wrapped in fire. And the fire isn't softening the blade, it's finishing it. Everyone watching the flames sees only warmth, only light, only something gentle and gold. What they don't see is the edge being set inside that glow, the edge that will one day part them from everything they were sure they owned. That's you. That's the thing they got wrong from the first move. They saw the warmth and assumed nothing sharp lived behind it. They saw you be kind, really kind, because your kindness was never a costume, and that's exactly what made it invisible as a weapon. And they filed you under soft, under safe, under someone they never had to plan around. What their small imaginations and large fear could never hold is that a person can be genuinely warm and ruthlessly precise in the same breath. That the smile and the strategy don't cancel out. The angel and the devil at this board were never two faces sharing one head. They're one person, and the warmth isn't a mask over the mind. The warmth is the reason the mind is never spotted coming. So doesn't the kindness make you readable? Doesn't being good hand them your whole playbook? No, dead opposite. Readable is the loud one, telegraphing every move because he needs the room watching him make it. Readable is the man who has to announce his own cleverness to feel it exists. You gave away nothing because you were never performing. Your kindness was real, so it leaked nothing because it wasn't a tactic anyone could decode. It was simply who you are, and who you are runs deeper than any scheme they could reverse engineer. They burned years hunting for your angle. You had no angle. You had a nature. And a nature can't be predicted the way a scheme can, because a scheme carries a goal, and a nature just carries a direction. That's not naivety. That's the one kind of unpredictability no strategist ever fully solves. Watch your softness stop being a liability and turn into the sharpest instrument on the board. Every cruel person you've ever met runs on one assumption, that kindness is weakness. Weakness is a door left open, and so the kind can be walked through and used. It's the load-bearing belief under every manipulator, every user, every person who read your patience as permission. And because they believe it all the way down, it becomes the exact spot where they go blind. They stroll straight into someone they're sure they can move, and they find out, far too late, they'd been reading a strategist as a victim the whole way. I've watched manipulators break their teeth on this. I once watched a man spend a full year certain he was steering someone kind, congratulating himself, sliding his pieces around, only to glance up one morning and realize he'd been the one positioned all along. Every inch of ground he thought he was taking had been handed to him on purpose, to draw him exactly where the trap already waited. He never smiled the old way again. Good. They thought softness meant you'd crack first. Instead, softness meant you'd never be seen coming. You weren't harmless, you were camouflaged. And there's a precise reason their loudest, their most confident, their most sure-footed player is the very one who fears you most. I told you I'd come back for that low feeling in your chest, and I will. Just not here. First, you have to hold the second thing, because without it, the reason behind their fear won't line up. Down we go. Number 2. Every piece you lost was a piece you sacrificed. You just didn't have the word for it yet. Look who's been counting your losses. Them. Always them. They tallied every setback you ever took, every bond that fell apart, every door that shut, every time they passed you over, and they stitched a story out of it, the story of a person who keeps losing. They loved that story. They passed it around to each other. They needed it true because as long as you were losing, they were winning, and their whole sense of themselves hung on that math. But they were counting the wrong thing entirely. They were tallying losses on a board where you were playing sacrifices, and those two are not the same, chosen one. They never have been. A loss is a piece torn from you against your will while the position rots. A sacrifice is a piece leaving the board while the position invisibly improves. To the untrained eye, they wear the same face. To the person across the table who doesn't understand the game, a sacrifice and a blunder look identical, right up to the instant the trap shuts and there's no square left to run to. Picture a chessboard mid-game, and a player deliberately letting a piece be taken, offering it even, sliding it forward into danger with a calm, steady hand, and the opponent snatching it up, delighted, sure he's just gained something, never once noticing the capture cracked open the exact diagonal that ends the game 3 moves later. That's what your life has looked like from the inside, even in the years you had no name for it. Every person who walked out on you pulled themselves off a square they were never meant to hold in your endgame. Every opportunity that fell apart cleared a lane you couldn't see yet. Every time you were forced to release something you were sure you needed, the board rearranged itself around the strength you had left. You didn't know you were sacrificing. You thought you were bleeding. But the shape of it, the way it kept clearing the exact obstacles that would have cost you everything later, that shape is too clean to be an accident, and I've watched it in enough lives to stop believing in that kind of luck. But some of those losses genuinely gutted you. Some of them tore away things you loved. How could that be strategy? Here's the answer, and it's cold, and it's true. Pain and purpose aren't enemies. The blade in the forge doesn't enjoy the fire. It doesn't need to. The fire isn't there for its comfort. The fire is there for its edge. Everything that stripped something from you was setting an edge you could never have set yourself, because you'd have never once chosen the fire. And that is precisely why the universe chose it for you. You aren't who you are in spite of what you lost. You're who you are because of the exact way you lost it. Because you lost the things that would have left you soft in the wrong places, weak at the wrong angles, leaning on the wrong people. What was taken was never yours to keep. It was ballast. And a rising thing sheds ballast whether it understands the rising or not. Every scar you carry is about to read differently. The people who took things from you believe they wounded you. Some of them are proud of it, in that quiet, cruel way of small people who count their wins in the wreckage they leave. Let them believe it. Let them clutch that story, because it's the story that keeps them exactly where you need them, confident, cozy, sure the game broke their way. They don't know they were snatching up pieces you set out for them. They don't know every square they took walked them one move nearer the position they can't escape. And here's the real reason they can't sleep, the thing I promised and now hand over. It isn't guilt keeping them up. Guilt would be too simple, too human, too fixable. What keeps them up is the slow, shapeless suspicion that they were never actually winning. That the person they were so sure they'd beaten doesn't carry themselves like anyone beaten. That you move like someone who knows a thing about the final position they don't. They can't name it, so it just sits there in the dark of their skulls at 3 a.m, a splinter they can't find with any light. That's their real insomnia, not remorse, dread. And you did nothing to plant it, except become exactly what you were always going to become. You weren't losing the game. You were the only one at the table who understood it was still being played. And that, the fact that you never once stopped playing while they were already toasting their win, is the exact thread that pulls us into the next truth, the one about patience, and why the way you waited was never the weakness they mistook it for. Watch how this connects. Number 3. Patience was never you waiting for permission. It was you setting the timer on their collapse. Here's the truth they'll never admit about your patience. They read it as passivity. They watched you not react, watched you soak up the slight, swallow the insult, let the moment slide past without the blow-up they were braced for. And they told themselves it meant you were weak, or scared, or just too dull to grasp that you'd been wronged. That was their reading, and it was catastrophically wrong, in the way only a comfortable person's readings ever are, because comfort makes people lazy about the inner lives of anyone they've decided not to fear. Patience isn't the absence of a response. Patience is a response, the most controlled one there is. It's the decision made in the cold clarity of a mind that sees more of the board than anyone around it, to not spend a move now that will matter infinitely more later. The impatient react to feel strong in the moment. The patient wait to be strong in the outcome. Those two things live on opposite ends of the same board. Picture a predator flat in the tall grass, dead still, so still it's become part of the field, watching a herd that has no idea it's being watched. It isn't frozen by fear. It isn't too slow to move. It's choosing with total precision the one instant when moving will cost it nothing and hand it everything. Every second it holds still is a second it's winning, because every second walks the prey one step nearer the exact spot where stillness ends. That's what your patience always was, even in the years you mistook it for helplessness. You weren't failing to act, you were declining to act early, which is the single hardest discipline on earth, because everything in the human body screams to react now, defend now, prove now. The ones who can't resist that scream spend their whole lives making moves that feel good and cost everything. You resisted it. Not because you were weak, because you were calibrated. But what if your patience was just fear in a strategist's coat? What if you were actually too scared to act? Here's how you tell the difference, and it's a clean, cold test. Fear waits and prays the danger passes. Patience waits and watches the danger walk itself into position. Fear has no plan. It only wants the moment over. Patience is nothing but plan. It wants the moment to arrive on its own terms. If, through all that waiting, you were reading the room, mapping the tells, clocking who moved when and why, filing away every crack and every mask around you, then that was never fear, chosen one. Fear doesn't take notes. Fear doesn't study. Fear shuts its eyes. You kept yours wide open the whole time, and I've watched enough people mix the two up to tell you with certainty which one you were doing. Here the waiting itself becomes the trap. The people who took your patience for weakness did a thing they'll never forgive themselves for once they finally understand it. They got comfortable. They stopped watching you. They dropped their guard because you'd trained them, through years of not reacting, to believe you never would. And a person who stopped watching you is a person who has handed you the whole board. That was the entire point of the wait. Not to endure, to disarm. Every year you didn't strike back was a year they grew more careless, more certain, more exposed. You weren't being trampled all that time. You were setting a timer none of them could hear ticking. And the cruelest, most beautiful thing about a timer set that way is that they wound it themselves with every flick of contempt, every dismissal, every casual cruelty they were sure carried no bill. Too late. I've watched patient people be pitied for their patience, and then watched the pity curdle into terror when the wait finally ended. And it always ends, chosen one. That's the thing about a set timer. It ends right on schedule. You didn't lack the strength to act. You had the far rarer strength to not act until it was time. And that discipline is exactly what makes what comes next unavoidable. Because a person who can master their own timing can master the timing of everyone around them, which walks us straight to the mirror and to how their own pride became the sharpest weapon on your side of the board. Look how it connects. Number 4. Their pride was a mirror you never had to touch. They walked into it on their own feet. Look who never had to lift a finger. You. The people who wronged you are, almost to the last one, ruled by pride. That's not a coincidence, it's the mechanism. Because pride is precisely the flaw that makes cruelty feel earned. A humble person can't stay cruel for long. Humility keeps asking uncomfortable questions. Pride asks nothing. Pride is certain. And certainty, chosen one, is the most exploitable state a human being can walk around in. Because a certain person can't be told anything, can't be warned, can't be pulled out of a trap of their own building, not even by you, if you were kind enough to try, which is exactly why the wise stop trying. You didn't have to defeat their pride, you only had to let it run. Pride, left running long enough, defeats itself with a thoroughness no enemy could ever match. Picture a hall of mirrors, and a proud man walking through it, every surface throwing his own face back at him, bigger, grander, more certain with each pane. He isn't looking at you. He can't see you. He's too busy admiring the version of himself the glass keeps feeding him, mistaking the reflection for the world, mistaking his own certainty for truth. And because he's watching himself, he isn't watching his feet. He doesn't see the floor change. He never notices that every mirror he passes is one you set, angled exactly to keep his eyes on himself and off the ground giving way beneath him. You didn't fight him. You gave him the one thing he craved most, the sight of his own greatness, and let it lead him, one adoring step at a time, off the edge he was far too proud to look down and see. But isn't that manipulation? Isn't it beneath the person you are? Doesn't using their pride make you as bad as them? No, and the gap between the two is the whole game. Manipulation invents a lie and feeds it to someone to march them somewhere they'd never choose to go. You invented nothing. Their pride was already there, roaring, starving, running the whole time. You just stopped throwing your body in front of it to slow it down. Every time in your life you swallowed your own truth to spare a proud person the fallout of their arrogance, you were doing their work for them, holding up a mirror that wouldn't hold itself. The day you stopped, the day you simply let them be as proud as they insisted on being, you didn't push them anywhere. You just stopped catching them. And a proud person who's no longer being caught discovers gravity very fast. That's not you turning cruel. That's you finally refusing to be cruel to yourself on their behalf. Watch their greatest strength turn into the exact instrument of their fall. They were proud of their volume, so they announced every move. They were proud of their cleverness, so they explained their schemes to anyone in earshot, dead sure no one in the room was sharp enough to use it, forgetting you were in the room, smiling, filing it away. They were proud of their dominance, so they could never, ever back down, even when backing down was the only door out, because to a proud person, retreat is death, and they'll torch the whole board before they take it. And that inability to retreat is the single most beautiful vulnerability there is, chosen one, because it means once they commit to a losing line, they are locked in it by the very thing they're proudest of. You never had to corner them. Their pride cornered them, then pressed the key into your hand, then thanked you for watching. They thought their pride made them untouchable. Instead, it made them readable, and the readable are already halfway beaten by anyone patient enough to study them. You weren't outmatched by their confidence. You were reading it like a map a map they drew for you, in their own hand, out of the sheer inability to imagine you could read at all. And a person who can read the map their enemy insists on drawing is a person who already holds the center of the board, whether the enemy knows it or not, which is exactly what happened next. In the quiet moment, the whole game turned, and not one of them heard it move. This is where it gets dangerous. Number 5. The center of the board became yours in a moment no one announced. Ever wonder why the decisive moments in a life almost never arrive with a sound? People carry a myth that the turning point will be loud, that there'll be a confrontation, a scene, a clean, dramatic beat where everyone flips and everyone in the room understands it flipped. It's a comforting myth because it means you'd know the moment when it came, you'd be ready, you'd get to feel it land. But that's not how real power moves. Real power moves in silence. The center of the board, the squares that decide everything, the ones every part of the position answers to, doesn't get taken with a shout. It gets taken quietly, one small placement at a time, until one day the whole game is being run from the middle, and the person who lost it never once caught the moment it slipped their grip. That's how it went for you. Not with a bang, with a shift so quiet only you could feel it, and for a long stretch even you weren't sure it was real. Picture a river that's been slowly, invisibly bending its course over years, and a house built confident on its bank, and the people inside going about their days, sure of the ground under them, never noticing the water has been sliding sideways the whole time, until the morning they wake and the river is standing where the foundation used to be. No flood, no storm, just the patient, silent, absolute authority of something that was always going to end up exactly where it now is. That's the center of the board passing to you. There was no announcement because power that has to announce itself isn't power yet. It's a performance of power, which is all your enemies ever had. Pure volume with no foundation under it. What you hold is the real thing, the quiet thing, the thing that doesn't need a witness to be true. And by the time anyone thinks to check the ground has already answered. But if it happened this quietly, how do you even know it happened? How do you trust a victory you never watched arrive? Here's how you know, and it's unmistakable once you go looking. You know it by the way they treat you now against the way they treated you then. You know it by that silence I named earlier. The held breath quiet that isn't peace. You know it by the fact that the people who used to move through you now move around you. You know it by the way a room quietly rearranges itself when you step in, everyone recalibrating to a presence they can feel and couldn't explain if you asked. You didn't watch the center change hands because you were the one holding it the whole time, and you never feel your own weight the way you feel someone else's. But everyone near you feels it. They've been feeling it a while. That's what the whispering is. That's what the sideways glances are. They're all reacting to a shift they can't name, and the reason they can't name it is that it never made a sound. Here, the quiet itself is the proof of your strength. Weak power is loud because it's insecure. It needs the noise to convince itself it exists. Real power is quiet because it has nothing to prove and no one to win over. It simply is. The way the center of a held board simply is the center, whether anyone's looking or not. Everything you were mocked for, your stillness, your restraint, your refusal to perform your own strength for an audience, was the exact texture of authority that doesn't need witnesses. You weren't quiet because you had nothing to say. You were quiet because the people who run the board don't narrate the board. They just move it. I've watched loud people lose the center to quiet people more times than I can hold in one memory, and the loud ones never see it go because they're straining to hear a sound a real shift never makes. You didn't seize the middle of the game. You occupied it so completely and so silently that by the time your enemies looked up, there was nowhere left to contest. Every good square already answered to you. And a person who holds the center that quietly is a person whose enemies are about to walk into something far worse than defeat. The slow, dawning, sleepless panic of watching their own pieces come apart, while the one they mocked says nothing at all. That's where we go next. Watch how it comes undone. Number 6. Their pieces are falling now, and the sound of it is their own panic. Now watch what happens to people who lose the center without ever catching it leave. They don't fall all at once. That would be a mercy, and the game deals in no mercies for the ones who took cruelty for cleverness. They fall the way a position caves in the late middle game, one piece at a time, each loss forcing the next, every move they make to save themselves cracking open a fresh wound somewhere else on the board. And the specific horror of it, the thing I've watched settle into the faces of the proud when their game finally turns, is that they can feel it happening and can't find the source. They keep reacting, they keep patching, they keep sliding pieces around to plug the holes, and every plug tears two more, and slowly it dawns on them that they aren't defending against an attack at all. They're drowning in the fallout of moves they made years ago, moves they were so proud of at the time, all coming due at once, with interest. Picture a fortress that looked unbreakable from the outside, all high walls and proud banners. And then one stone shifts, just one, deep in the foundation, and the crack runs upward, silent at first, then splitting, then the whole structure learning in real time it was never as solid as it performed. The people inside run wall to wall trying to hold it together, and their running is the very tremor that shakes the rest of it down. That's what's happening to the ones who wronged you. Their fortress is coming apart, and they're the ones rattling it, because panic makes people move, and movement in a lost position is just a faster road to losing. You aren't attacking the fortress. You don't have to. You built nothing against them. You just stopped being one of the stones holding up walls that were never yours to hold. But what if you don't see them falling? What if from where you stand they still look like they're winning, still look untouched? Then you're staring at the mask and not the man, chosen one, because the fall of a proud person is almost never public at first. They're the most invested people alive in looking fine. The falling happens on the inside, long before it shows on the outside, in the sleeplessness I named, in the private, frantic recalculation, in the growing certainty they can't confess to a single soul that something has gone fundamentally wrong that they cannot fix. The mask stays up longest on exactly the ones cracking worst underneath, because they have the most to shield. Don't measure their collapse by their performance. Measure it by the effort the performance now costs them. That effort is the tell, and it's enormous. Here their frantic movement becomes the very thing that finishes them. A person in a strong position can afford to be still. A person in a collapsing one can't stop moving, because stillness would mean facing what stillness shows. So they overreach, they lash out, they forge alliances out of desperation and shatter them out of paranoia. They grab at anything that might restore the feeling of control they lost so quietly they never marked the moment. And every one of those desperate grabs is a fresh mistake, a new piece hung, a new square handed away, because desperation is the opposite of calibration, and you, chosen one, are nothing if not calibrated. You're watching people take themselves apart at speed, and all you had to do was stop absorbing their falls on your own body. Good. I've watched the proud fall exactly this way more times than I can hold in memory, and it's always the same. Not a defeat delivered to them, but a defeat they administer to themselves, frame by frantic frame, while the quiet one they mocked simply declines to catch them anymore. You aren't their executioner, you're their witness. And being witnessed, calmly, by the person they were so sure they'd beaten, that's a specific torment nothing prepares them for. But there's still one truth I've been holding back, the one that changes how you understand every fall you're watching, and I told you earlier you weren't ready for it. You're closer now. Not there. First, the next turn. Watch how it deepens. Number 7. What looks like your revenge is only the board correcting itself. Here's the part that will free you, if you let it drop all the way down. You've probably wondered, in the quiet hours, whether wanting to see them fall makes you as cruel as they were, whether the part of you that feels a cold satisfaction watching their fortress crack is a stain on the angel they underestimated. Let me lift that weight off you completely, because it was never yours to carry. What you're watching isn't your revenge. Revenge is a thing you do. This is a thing that's happening, with you or without you, on a timeline you don't set, by a logic older than your hurt. The board is correcting itself. Weight that was set wrong is finding its true level. People who built their standing on the exploitation of a strategist they mistook for a victim are living the entirely natural result of building on a foundation that was never real. You didn't summon that. You just stopped propping it up. Picture an iceberg, and everyone above the waterline arguing over the small white peak they can see. Sure, that peak is the whole of the thing, and beneath them, unseen, the vast, true mass of it, moving on currents no one at the surface can feel, deciding everything. The people who wronged you have spent their whole lives at the surface, mistaking the visible peak of a situation for its reality. They thought the game was the part they could see, the words, the moves, the moments they won out loud. They never once suspected the enormous submerged mass underneath, the true weight of consequence and character and time, steering everything by laws they were too shallow to study. And now that hidden mass is surfacing, the way it always eventually does, and they're standing on the peak they mistook for the world, feeling it tilt, and they can't understand why. You aren't the storm. You're just the one who always knew there was more below the line than above it. But you do feel it, that satisfaction. Isn't feeling it proof you've become what you hated? No. And hear this clearly, because it matters for who you are on the far side of all this. Feeling satisfaction at the correction of an injustice isn't cruelty. It's justice recognizing itself. Cruelty is inflicting undeserved suffering for pleasure. What you feel is the deep, clean relief of watching a wrong swing back to right, a scale return to balance, a truth finally weigh what it always should have weighed. That feeling isn't a stain. It's your conscience confirming that what's happening is correct. The cruel feel pleasure at suffering they caused. You feel peace at suffering you didn't cause and didn't have to. Those aren't the same feeling, and they don't rise from the same place. And I've watched enough people torture themselves over this exact confusion to tell you plainly, your satisfaction is clean. Let yourself have it. Here the thing you are most ashamed of becomes the proof of your innocence. You were afraid your hunger for justice made you dark. But a truly dark person doesn't wait for the board to correct itself. They force the correction with their own 2 hands and call it fate. You didn't. You waited. You let the mass beneath the surface do what it was always going to do. You kept your own hands clean, not because you couldn't act, but because you understood the cleanest victories are the ones the universe delivers on your behalf, while you simply refuse to interfere. That restraint, that refusal to become the thing that hurt you even when you had every reason and every opening, isn't weakness. It's the final proof they were always beneath you. You didn't need to sink to reach them. The water rose on its own. They thought you wanted revenge. Instead, you wanted the truth to weigh what it weighs. And it does now, whether they're ready or not. You weren't the villain of their story. You were the correction their story was always bending toward. And a person who understands that the board corrects itself is a person standing at the lip of a truth so large it rearranges everything that came before it. The truth I've been holding back since the beginning. The one you finally have the frame to receive. Almost. One more turn first. This is where it breaks open. Number 8. The real reason they fear you has nothing to do with what you'll do. Here's the truth I promised you at the very start, when I said their loudest fears you most and told you the reason would have to wait. You're ready now. The real reason they fear you isn't what you might do to them. If it were only that, they could arm against it, plan for it, brace for a blow they could see coming. Fear of an action is manageable, because actions can be anticipated. No, what they fear is something they can never defend against, because it isn't an action at all. It's a fact. They fear what you are. They fear that a person can be genuinely kind and genuinely dangerous at once, because that pairing shatters the entire operating system they built their lives on. Their whole world-view needs kindness to be weakness, needs the gentle to be safe, needs the ones who smile to be usable. You're living proof the map they navigate the world by is wrong. And nothing on earth terrifies a person more than finding out their map has been lying the whole time. Picture one impossible reading on an instrument everyone trusted. A single needle swinging to a place the rules swear can't exist, holding there, calm, refusing to correct itself. The people who run on those rules can't process it. They can't fit it into the model. And a reading they can't explain frightens them worse than any enemy they can, because an enemy has limits they can study, but an impossible reading means the limits themselves might be wrong. That's what you are to them, chosen one. Not a threat inside their system, a crack in the system itself. Every time they see you, kind and unbroken, gentle and unbeaten, soft and somehow standing while their fortress falls, you remind them that everything they believed about how power works, about who gets to win, about what strength even looks like, was a lie they told themselves to feel safe. They can't unsee you, and they can't sleep near a truth that size. But if they fear what you are and not what you do, does that mean you never have to do anything at all? Yes, that's exactly what it means, and it's the most freeing thing I can hand you. You've been carrying, maybe for years, some quiet pressure to prove yourself, to finally act, to land the blow that shows them all what you're capable of. Set it down. You don't need it. Your existence is the blow. Your continued, unbroken, smiling existence in a world that swore you'd be crushed is the thing they can't survive being reminded of. The sheer fact of you, thriving, calm, uncorrupted by everything they threw, is a standing refutation of their whole justification for the way they've lived. You defeat them by being, not by doing. And a person who defeats their enemies simply by refusing to stop being exactly who they are is a person who has already, quietly, completely won. Here your very nature, the thing they mocked, becomes the one weapon they can never disarm. They can plan against a scheme. They can defend against an attack. They cannot defend against your character, because your character isn't a move they can counter. It's the ground the whole board sits on. Every strategy they've ever run leans on the assumption that people can be broken, bought, or bent. You're the person who couldn't be, and that assumption holds up everything they are. Pull it out, and their whole architecture of cruelty has nothing left to stand on. You didn't have to attack the foundation. You are the proof it was never solid. That's not a threat you make. That's a truth you are. They feared what you might do. They never grasped the danger was already complete the moment you refused to become like them. That you'd beaten them, not with a future action, but with a present fact. You weren't a weapon they needed to watch. You were a verdict they'd already received and couldn't appeal. And a verdict that has already been delivered doesn't need enforcing, which is exactly why what comes next isn't a battle at all, but the slow, sealed certainty of a game that ended long before its final move was ever made. That's where we go now. Watch how it closes in. Number 9. The point of no return already passed, and you were the only one who felt it. Ever wonder when the game was actually decided? Not when it ended. Games end long after they're decided. Everyone knows that who's ever watched a lost position drag itself through 15 more pointless moves before the resignation. The decision came earlier, in a moment so quiet it registered on no face but yours. There's a point in every real contest called the point of no return, the move after which every possible line leads to the same outcome, no matter what the losing side tries. Before it, the game is alive. 100 futures still breathe. After it, there's only one future left, and everything that follows is just that future taking its time to arrive. And here's the strange, beautiful thing I need you to sit inside. Your point of no return has already passed. It happened. The game was decided some while ago, in a moment you may not even be able to name. And everything you're living through now isn't the deciding, it's the arriving. Picture a stone rolled to the very top of a long hill, and the single instant it tips past the crest, the moment it stops needing any push at all, where gravity takes full ownership, where the outcome turns certain, even though the stone has barely begun to move. To someone watching from a distance, nothing dramatic happened. The stone's still near the top. It's moving slow. It looks like it could still be stopped. But it can't. The decision was made at the crest, in that silent tip, and everything after is just the hill keeping its promise. Your enemies are still staring at the stone near the top, telling themselves there's time. You felt the tip. You know the crest is behind you. And that's why you carry yourself so differently now. Not with the anxiety of someone still fighting for the outcome, but with the strange calm of someone who already knows it. But if it's already decided, why doesn't it feel finished? Why are you still in the middle of all of it? Because decided and finished aren't the same, chosen one. And the gap between them is where most people lose their nerve. The stone still has the whole hill to roll. The lost position still has moves to play out. The decision is instant. The arrival takes time. And that stretch, after you know but before it shows, is the hardest ground there is, because you can feel the certainty in your bones, while the visible world hasn't caught up yet, and everyone around you is still acting like the question's open. It isn't. Your work in this stretch isn't to fight for a victory you've already won. Your work is to hold your nerve while it arrives, to not talk yourself out of a certainty that's real just because the world is slow to show it. Hold. The hill is long, but the crest is behind you. Here the loneliness you carried your whole life finally shows its purpose. You were the only one who felt the point of no return pass, And that's always been your burden, hasn't it? Seeing things before anyone else, knowing things you couldn't prove, feeling the shift in a room while everyone else chattered on unaware. That isolation, that specific loneliness of perceiving what others can't, isn't a curse. It's the price and the mark of the one who reads the board deepest. You're lonely in your knowing, because knowing that early is rare, and rare things are, by their nature, held alone. But that same loneliness is the proof of your sight. Ordinary players never feel the crest. They only notice the outcome when the stone lands at the bottom, and by then it's obvious to everyone. You felt it at the top. That's not a smaller life, that's a deeper one. They think the game's still open. You know the crest is behind you, and you've known a while. You weren't confused all those years you felt certain of things no one else could see. You were early. And a person who is early to the truth of the board is a person who has already crossed into the place where the ending is written, and only the reading of it remains. Which brings us to the ending itself, the mate that was set from the very first move, the pattern that was always going to close exactly this way. This is where it locks, number 10. The mate was set in motion before you knew you were playing. Here's the part that reframes your whole life, so take it slow. The checkmate closing around your enemies now wasn't something you drew up recently. It was set in motion long before you understood you were even at a board, before you had words for any of this, before you could have named a single one of these truths, in the years you thought you were just surviving. The first move of the mate was made the day the world decided to underestimate you. Everything since has been the pattern completing itself. This is the shape I've watched again and again in the lives of the ones who are forged instead of favored. The endgame was written into the opening, and the opening was written by their enemies, in the moment those enemies chose to mistake a strategist for a victim. They didn't just wrong you, they cast the first move of their own defeat, handed you the game, and never once knew they'd done it. Picture a single seed dropped into dark soil, and above it, years of weather it holds no control over. Drought, frost, storms, the crushing pressure of the earth itself. To the seed, each of those is a hardship, an assault, a thing to be survived. But the seed doesn't know the drought drove its roots deeper than comfort ever would have, that the frost hardened it against what was coming, that the pressure of the soil is the only thing giving the rising shoot something to push against. Every hardship was a move in a game the seed never knew it was playing, and every move led to the same place, the tree it was always going to become. That's the mate that was set in motion in you before you knew you were playing. The betrayals, the dismissals, the loneliness, the swallowed humiliations, each one a hardship to endure. Each one, in truth, a move that could only ever lead to the person you are now, standing where you're standing, holding the board you hold. But if it was all set in motion, did you even do anything? Was any of it your choice, or were you just carried? Here's the answer, and it holds both truths at once, which is the only way truth ever comes. The pattern was set in motion by others, but you were the one who didn't break inside it, and that was always the variable. The mate was prepared, but it needed you to stay yourself long enough to reach it. A different person, handed the same opening, breaks, turns bitter, turns cruel, rots into the very thing that hurt them, and in the rotting forfeits the game entirely, because the whole victory hung on staying uncorrupted. So yes, the pattern was moving before you knew it. And no, you weren't merely carried. You held. You kept your nature through pressure built to destroy it. The seed doesn't control the weather, but it does have to not rot. You didn't rot. That was your move, and it was the only one that mattered. And you made it every single day without knowing it was the winning move. Here every year you thought was wasted turns into the year the mate was built. You've grieved lost time, I know. Everyone forged this way does, the years that felt like nothing, like waiting, like being passed over while others pulled ahead. Let me hand those years back to you, transformed. There were no wasted years. Each one was a move. The seasons that felt empty were the seasons your roots ran deepest. The relationships that failed cleared the pieces that would have blocked the final line. The recognition that never came protected you from becoming someone who needed it. Every apparent nothing was a something, positioned exactly by a game larger than your understanding at the time. You didn't lose those years. You spent them precisely on a position they cannot see and cannot escape. The mate was set before you knew you were playing, and it was completed by the one thing your enemies could never account for, which was your refusal to become them. You weren't a latecomer to your own victory. You were its author before you could read your own handwriting. And an author who wrote the ending into the beginning is a person for whom the final move isn't a struggle, but a signature, which is exactly what remains now. The closing of the pattern, the ring around that one square I left untouched at the very start. We're almost there. This is where it converges. Number 11. That one lit square is where all of it was always pointing. That forgotten piece on the lit square, the one they ruled out, the one I set before you at the very beginning and refused to explain, that square is where every truth I've handed you has been quietly turning you to face. Everything converges here. The smile that was camouflage, the losses that were sacrifices, the patience that wound the timer, the pride that mirrored them off their own edge, the center taken in silence, the collapse that was their own panic, the correction that wasn't your revenge, the fear of what you are. None of it was a separate lesson. It was one truth seen from 11 angles, and all 11 point at that single square, at the piece they dismissed as nothing. And you're finally ready to see why it never once had to move. Picture a great cathedral of interlocking arches, each one seeming to stand on its own, and at the dead center of the whole structure, a single stone, the keystone that every arch secretly presses against, the one piece holding all the others in place. Pull any decorative stone and the cathedral stands. Pull the keystone and everything drops at once, because everything was always resting on it, even the parts that looked independent. That forgotten piece on the lit square is your keystone. It's you, the you that was underestimated, the you that stayed uncorrupted, the you that everyone waved off as not mattering. The entire structure of this victory rests on that one dismissed piece. And the beauty of it, the thing that makes it a real masterpiece, is that the piece never had to move. It only had to be there, holding, while everything else arranged itself around its quiet, unmoved strength. But how can the piece they ignored be the most important one? How can not moving be the winning move? Because in the deepest games, chosen one, the decisive piece is often the one that controls the most squares simply by existing where it sits. It doesn't need to travel. Its power is positional. It shapes the entire board just by holding it square, forcing every enemy calculation to account for it, whether it moves or not. That's you. You didn't win by doing more than everyone. You won by being immovably exactly where you were always meant to be, while the loud pieces exhausted themselves racing across the board and hanging themselves on the squares you quietly controlled. The forgotten piece was never weak. It was the strongest piece on the board, and its strength wore the disguise of insignificance, which is the most powerful disguise there is, because no one defends against a peace they've decided doesn't count. Here, the thing that hurt you most, being overlooked, reveals itself as the source of all your power. Being dismissed was agony. I won't pretend otherwise. But being dismissed is also invisibility. And invisibility is the one thing no strategy can plan against. Your enemies built their entire game around the pieces they could see, the threats they took seriously, the players they respected. They never accounted for the piece on the lit square, because they decided it didn't matter, and so they left uncontested the exact square that decided everything. Their contempt was your camouflage. Their dismissal was your fortress. The very thing that wounded you was the thing that made you unstoppable, because you cannot be defended against by people who refuse to see you. You weren't overlooked despite being the key. You were the key because you were overlooked. 11 truths, 1 square, 1 unmoved piece holding the whole cathedral of the ending in place. You were never the piece that didn't matter. You were the piece everything mattered around. And a piece that holds the entire structure simply by being where it is has only one thing left before it. The final move, the ring closing around that square, the moment the whole board resolves into the verdict it was always going to reach. That's where we go now, into the last of it. This is where it seals. Number 12. The ring is closing, and not one exit was left open. Now watch the ring close, because this is the part that separates a real victory from a lucky one. In the endgames that decide everything, the losing side always hunts for the escape, the one square, the one resource, the single move that lets them slip the net and drag the game on. And in a masterful mate, that hunt is the final cruelty, because every square they run to has already been covered. Not by a scramble of last-minute moves, but by all the quiet positioning that came before. Work done so early and so silently that by the time the ring visibly closes, there's nothing left to do. The exits were sealed long ago. Your enemies are in that hunt right now. They're looking for the way out, and they're finding, square by square, that every direction they turn was already answered, in the years they thought you were losing, by the exact patience and restraint they mocked you for. Picture a canyon with walls that have been drawing inward the whole time. So slow, no one inside marked the motion. And at first, there's open ground everywhere, endless room, no urgency. And then, with no single dramatic instant, the stone is at their shoulders on every side at once, and they turn and turn again, and every gap that was a way out is now sheer rock. The walls didn't chase them. They didn't need to. They simply narrowed everywhere by a law older than the panic and shut off every exit not through pursuit but through sheer inevitability. That's the ring around your enemies. You aren't driving them into a corner. The consequences of who they are and what they did are simply closing in on every side, sealing every square, and they're spinning in place, discovering there was never anywhere to go. Because a mate isn't an attack on one square, it's the quiet removal of all of them. But what if one of them does slip out? What if someone escapes? Doesn't that unravel everything? Here's the truth that settles it, chosen one. In a real mate, there's no escape, because the mate was never about a single blow they could dodge. It was about the whole shape of the position, and you can't dodge a shape. A person might duck a punch. They can't duck the fact of who they turned out to be, the reputation they earned, the consequences they ceded, the trust they burned. Those things surround them at every square because those things are simply the truth arriving. And truth has no gap in it for the guilty to slip through. Even if one of them physically walks away, they walk away into a life that's already the verdict. There's no exit from being who they made themselves. The ring is closed not because you trapped them, but because they're trapped inside the accounting of their own choices, and that's the one prison with no door. Here, every moment you didn't retaliate reveals itself as a square you were quietly sealing. All those times you stayed your hand, you thought you were just enduring, holding back, maybe even failing to stand up for yourself. You weren't. Each restraint denied them the one thing that could have saved them, a reason to call you the villain, an attack to defend against, an escape into being the wronged party. By never handing them that, you sealed the exit of victimhood, the last square any falling manipulator runs to. They can't cast themselves as the ones you wronged, because you never wronged them. Your innocence closed their final door. The very restraint they read as weakness was the move that left them nowhere to stand. You didn't corner them with force. You cornered them with the fact that you never had to. The ring is closed, every square covered, every exit sealed by work done so early and so quietly they never once saw it as work at all. You weren't waiting to be rescued from this game. You were, the whole time, the reason it could only ever end one way. And a person who has closed every exit simply by staying innocent and patient and immovable is a person for whom only one thing remains: to understand what this victory was actually for, because it was never only about them. This is where it opens into the last truth. Number 13. This was never about defeating them, it was about becoming undefeatable. Here's the truth that outlives every enemy you've ever had, and I saved it for last because you needed all the rest to hold its weight. This was never really about them. The fall of the people who wronged you is real, and it's just, and it's happening, but it was never the point. It was the byproduct. The point was always you. The point was that a person could pass through everything you passed through, the underestimation, the betrayal, the loneliness, the humiliation, the long forging in a fire you never once chose, and come out not broken, not bitter, not twisted into the shape of what hurt them, but stronger, clearer, kinder, and finally, completely unbreakable. Your enemies were never the destination. They were the resistance the muscle grew against. And the muscle is the point. You are the point. Their defeat was just the visible edge of the real event, which was the making of someone who can never be defeated that way again. Picture a sword drawn at last from the forge, quenched, finished, lifted to the light, and the fire behind it going out, forgotten, irrelevant now, because it did its one job. The blade doesn't spend its life thinking about the flames. The flames were never the meaning. The flames were the means. The blade is the meaning, and the blade is what remains, long after the fire is cold ash no one remembers. That's you now, chosen one. The fire that made you, the people, the pain, the years, it did its work, and its work was you, and now it can fade into the background of a life that's no longer about it. Your enemies were the fire. You are the blade. And a blade, once truly forged, doesn't fear fire anymore. That's what undefeatable means. Not that you'll never face hardship again, but that hardship can no longer do a thing to you except sharpen you further. But if this was about becoming undefeatable, does that mean you'll never be hurt again? Never struggle? Never face another enemy? No. And this is the final freeing truth. Undefeatable doesn't mean untouched. It means nothing that touches you can any longer take you from yourself. New enemies will come. The undefeatable always draw them, because your existence stays a refutation of everyone who needs kindness to be weakness. New fires will come, but you've already been through the forging, and you know now what you are. The piece that holds without moving, the strategist behind the smile, the keystone the whole cathedral rests on. You'll meet the next hardship not as the underestimated one hoping to survive, but as the one who already learned the fire serves the blade. That's the difference. Not the absence of struggle, the end of struggle's power over who you are. Here, everything you suffered becomes the foundation nothing can ever shake again. The reason you're undefeatable now is precisely that you've already survived what should have destroyed you. You have proof, real, lived, unarguable proof, that you can pass through the worst the board can offer and remain yourself. No future enemy can threaten you with anything you haven't already outlasted. That's a security no untested person will ever hold. The favored, the ones handed everything, are fragile precisely because they've never been forged. The first real fire will find them soft. You aren't soft. You were made in the fire they never faced, and that's why you'll still be standing when the next storm has passed, exactly as you're standing now, kind, clear, unmoved, and finally, permanently free. This was never about defeating them. It was about becoming the one thing they could never make you and never be themselves. Unbreakable. You weren't playing to win a game against small people. You were being forged into someone no game can ever truly threaten again. And now you know all 13 truths, and the ring is closed, and the mate is set, and the blade is drawn, and the only thing left is for you to carry it, quietly, kindly, immovably, into everything that comes next. If every word of this landed as truth in your chest, if you recognized yourself in the piece that never had to move, then leave the word unbreakable in the comments, so everyone who was forged the same way can find each other in the dark, and tap that like one final time to mark that you made it all the way to the end of the board, and subscribe so the next message finds you when it's ready. You were never the piece that didn't matter. You were the whole game.